honored today that Mr. John Eagle Sr., Standing Rock Elder and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, will get us started on our journey with the magnificent bison. The animal recognized officially in 2016 as the American mammal. Just as our land acknowledgement recognizes the ancestral possession of this continent by our native citizens, our understanding of the bison must begin with a recognition of the ancestral relationship of the bison, as Dr. McDonald said, to our native communities. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Eagle.
Matach ampetikile chantewashte na pe chuzapalo. Chakaska emache ape na washicho ea Janigo Senior hemacha. Hunkpapa oshpa emataha na chanka ok kioshpa emataha. Na wambli koyakmani tuahe emataha. My relatives, in my language, what I said is that I greet you all with a good-hearted handshake today. And I told you that my Lakota name, it translates to white elk, but my English name is John Eagle Sr. I come from the Hunkpapa band of the Titwan Oyate, the Lakota people. And I descend from an extended family known as the Sorbacks. Amongst the Hunkpapa, there were 7 Teoshpa. And the Teoshpa that I come from were known to have been horsemen, great horsemen. And I'm very proud of that fact, and I'm very honored to have come from the family that I come from. I also told you that I come from a family of a man whose name was Wambli Koyagmani. And it translates to one who walks dressed in the eagle. After hearing Dr. McDonald and hearing what was said earlier, I felt it appropriate for you to hear one of the first languages spoken on this land. You know, when I went into the United States military, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, as they were swearing me in, they asked me, "Do you speak a foreign language?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Which one?" And I said, "English." And I wasn't even trying to be funny. I just answered the question and spent the next hour doing push-ups. I didn't know why I was doing those push-ups. But in our ways, in our beliefs, and our understandings, that's the most respect I could show you, is to speak to you in my own language. I'm very happy and honored to have been asked to come today because of what I'm going to speak to you about. You know, when you think about, every time I tell this story, I have a vivid memory of that day when my dad first walked me to a school bus, and he was actually holding my hand when he walked me out there. And from that point until today, I was indoctrinated into Western European school of thought, and so were you. But I'm very fortunate to come from a family who kept our oral histories intact. And I had an uncle, the late Philip Eagle Sr., who was my dad's oldest brother, who used to speak to me in Lakota, and he used to tell me stories of long ago. He was fortunate enough to have been raised by that grandfather whose name was Wambli Koyagmani. There's an unfortunate history here in this country that unfortunately we're going to need to address in order for me to help you to understand what I'm going to share with you. Wambli Koyagmani was 18 years old when he was forced to take a Christian name. And the Christian name that he took is where my name descends from. We used to call him Lala Dopa, but his name was Francis Eagle. And it was from that point forward that all of us who descend from him took the last name Eagle. Why I say it's unfortunate is that where I live in Fort Yates, North Dakota, was actually a fort. There was actually a military command there. And during this transitional period, of our ancestors coming onto the reservation systems, there was a forced assimilation that occurred. And he was actually put in jail and told that they were going to starve his family if he didn't take a Christian name. So for the love of his family, for the love of his people, he took a Christian name. I need you to understand that there's an unfortunate history in this country. You know, this relative of ours, in our language we say Pateoyate. It means a buffalo nation. And that's actually the oldest name for us, because in our creation stories, that's how they refer to us, as Pateoyate, a buffalo nation. So they were more than what history tells you about them. They were more than what history tells you about us. They were the model for us on how to conduct ourselves as a father, as a grandfather, as a relative. Everything that we learned about how we function as families and extended families came from Pateoyate. Our family recently participated in one of the annual ceremonies, which we Wangwachi. It's a Sundance. It's a renewal of our way of life. It's a renewal of our year, and it coincides with the summer solstice. And I want to sing you a song to just kind of put myself in the mind frame to talk about something that's sacred to us. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey o hey o. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey ro. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey o. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey o. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey ron. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey o. Ta ta ko ya te wa che ya o hey ron. Even though the free roaming herds are gone, we still honor them. We still call upon them and our ancestors in times of great need. And what that song says is a buffalo nation is coming dancing. And it repeats it over and over, that a buffalo nation is coming dancing. You know, in my language, we really have no way to say good morning to each other. What we used to say was hina lakchi, and it's just a statement that it's early now. Or we used to say ampetewashte, that today's a good day. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, the sun rose in the east, it's going to go overhead, and it's going to set in the west. And if we're fortunate enough, we get to see that again tomorrow. And that's one of the things that I think as a society, and I mean as a society, all of us together, seem to forget that this is the gift. This is the gift to be here in this beautiful place with each other, experiencing everything that we experience, both the good and the bad. This is the gift. When you think about that relationship, though, that relationship is all around us. In our creation story, our first word for the Creator was shka. And shka literally means movement. And in the telling of our creation story, as it progresses, it turns to daku shka, something that moves. And then daku wakanshka, something sacred that moves. And then finally wakantanka, that great spirit. This is part of a sacred language that's only said in prayer. The thing about our languages is that there's a male dialect and there's a female dialect. but we also have a sacred language that's only used in prayer. Why I think that's important is because we just now transitioned into summer. And you know, for us Lakota that were fortunate enough to have been told our star knowledge, I didn't need a calendar to tell me that. I didn't need a calendar to tell me that it was the first day of summer, because there was a sacred alignment that happened in the night sky in association with the sun. And the sun crossed through a constellation up there that for eons, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, has told us that it's the first day of summer. The same thing's going to happen as we progress into fall. There's going to be a sacred alignment up in the night sky that's going to tell us it's the first day of fall. And then again in winter, another sacred alignment. And then again in spring. And then that cycle repeats itself. Shka, that movement. We're inhaling oxygen, we're exhaling carbon dioxide. Those trees outside are inhaling carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen. Shka, that movement. Water evaporates, goes to the sky, comes back as rain. Shka. Even though it looks to us like we're sitting still, we're actually not sitting still, because Unchimakha, Grandmother Earth, is moving. Shka. And she's not just hanging out there in space all by herself, right? She's revolving around Ampetui, around the sun, and all of her relatives. That same sacred motion. And that same sacred motion goes all the way out into the universe. Mainstream society was so curious about what was out there because for thousands of years, ancient cultures have been watching the night sky. And they launched something out there. And when it sent back images of the galaxies, what did the galaxies look like? What shapes were they in? Were they trapezoids? Were they hexagons? No. Shka, sacred movement. Look at your fingerprint. I'm serious, look at your fingerprint. That sacred movement is right here, imprinted in your fingerprints. That's how deeply connected you are to everything in creation. It's just sometimes people don't feel that anymore. And that's the purposes of our ceremonies, the purposes of us keeping our ancient way of life alive, is so that our people still feel that. So we still feel our connection to the universe. You say prayer, we say wochekya. They actually don't mean the same thing. We don't have a word in my language for prayer. Wochekya literally means to acknowledge your relationships. So when an elder or a man who is a spiritual person is called upon to say that wochekya, he'll acknowledge his relationship to everything in the West, going all the way out into the universe. And then everything in the North, everything in the East, everything in the South. Everything above and then everything below. And at that point, he becomes the hochoka. He becomes the voice from the center. Because you see, my ancestors used to say that the center of the universe is everywhere. And the reason why they said that is if you acknowledge your relationship to everything in creation, you become that center of the universe. So for us, who learned our language, who learned our way of life, when we're called upon to wochekya, we don't see a man. We see the universe. Shka, that sacred relationship. And it has to do with what President McDonald talked about when he told you that what came to his mind when he thought about this sacred relative was matakoyase. Matakoyase literally means that I'm related to everything. So even us sitting here, even though if we were to pull out our genealogy charts, we probably couldn't find connections. But yet in my spiritual belief, we're related to each other. And that's why I greeted you as my relatives. But in my spiritual beliefs, we're related to everything in creation, so we believe that everything in creation has a spirit. Even a stone. Even a tree. Even a deer, a horse, a buffalo. So in my language and our understandings, we refer to them as a nation upon themselves. So, pateoyate. Buffalo Nation. The thing about them, though, is they're the ones that gifted us with our star knowledge. You see, in the past, when you look at these rivers, and that's the thing about water, too. I heard an elder stand up at a gathering, and I think she was 101 that day she stood up and talked. Her name was Marie Rando, and she reminded us, Manikile, this water. Maniwichoni, water of life. Wakpala, the creeks. Wakpa, the rivers. Ble, the lakes. Now, Owacha, the ocean. Reason why we call this Maniwichoni is because without water there can be no life. So my ancestors used to follow Pateoyate. And I really don't like that word nomadic. I know a lot of times they refer to my ancestors as being nomadic, but for whatever reason, the picture that creates for me is they just wandered endlessly around on the plains, but they didn't. Pateoyate used to follow the water sources. So likewise, my ancestors followed the water sources as well. And there's an old story that unfortunately in our ways, our spiritual laws are real strong. So there's things I can't talk about, but I can make references to. So our creation story can only be told after the first day of winter. And once the thunders come back, we can't tell them anymore. And same thing with the point of origin story of our star knowledge. Can only be told after the first day of winter, and once the thunders come back, can't be told again. But I'm here to tell you that Pateoyate is what gifted us with that star knowledge, to be able to tell as the seasons change just by looking at a night sky. Those rivers, those creeks, they were the highways of our past, if you will. All of our sacred sites, all of our ancestral places, to include the ancestral burials, are located along the rivers and along the drainages to those rivers, because that's where my ancestors traveled. I get a little emotional, and I don't know why I'm feeling emotional, but maybe it's because their story is our story as well. You know, unfortunately, there was millions upon millions of them that used to freely roam this continent. And I keep thinking about the bison in Yellowstone, because the park is fenced in, which only gives them a certain capacity to run a certain number of bison every year. But every year, it seems like that bison's DNA is triggered by that star knowledge, and they want to move. They want to follow that ancient pathway just like we still do. And because they move and they come out of that park, unfortunately, they're slaughtered. And they're the last indigenous herd on this continent. Maybe part of why I'm feeling emotional too is because I grew up in a ranching family. Back during a time when there was no such thing as ATVs and UTVs. You actually needed a horse if you wanted to manage a ranch back then. So we had huge herds of horses. It wasn't until I became older, though, that I realized that cows were having an adverse effect on the land because they're not indigenous to here. If you look at a pasture where cattle are run, you're going to see deep cattle trails because they follow each other. And they'll follow each other and follow each other until that cattle trail gets so deep they won't follow each other anymore. They'll create a new one. But if you look in a pasture where buffalo are run, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see those deep rutted cattle trails. And the thing about a buffalo too is that a cow, and I'm speaking from my own experience, right, because I grew up on a ranch, they'll eat the grass all the way down to the dirt. But a buffalo won't. And the reason being is when a buffalo grazes, it uses its tongue to wrap around the grass and then it pulls on it. As that buffalo is processing it, it's actually fertilizing behind it as it's moving along the ground. When you think about their hooves, they have cloven hooves. So they're actually turning the soil as they're moving. And it stimulates growth. When you think about that relationship that I told you about Shka and all the sacred movement in the universe that we're a part of that sometimes we don't see anymore, there was a symbiotic relationship with everything that was here in this continent. A symbiotic relationship. Because I'm a tribal historic preservation officer, I work with federal agencies. One in particular, U.S. Forestry Service. They're starting to realize that the cottonwoods aren't reproducing along the Missouri River because of the dams. It's not allowed to ebb and flow like it used to, which used to stimulate new growth. So they tried to plant some cottonwoods, and only one took. All those trees that they planted, only one of them took. So I like to tease them. I tell them that that's a U.S. Forestry Service National Forest. You got one tree sitting out there. After failing a number of times, they asked us, they said, why do you think they're not taking? I said, you need to go into a cottonwood forest and look at what they're looking at up above and to look at what they're looking at down below. And look to see what's growing around them, to see what's looking up at those trees, because everything in this continent has a symbiotic relationship. In our way of life, we're taught to really pay attention to the land, really pay attention to animal nations, and to really pay attention to weather patterns. Things used to be predictable by moons. So we have 13 moons in our calendar. And each moon tells you what to prepare for on the land. Like right now, we're in Wojupiwe. It means the moon of planting, Wojupiwe. So every moon told you what to prepare for on the land. But some things disrupt that cycle now. Our medicines aren't as predictable as they used to be. Everything that we needed is still on the land. And the unfortunate thing I have to tell you about all of this is that I come from a family that was really self-sufficient. You talk about renewable resources, and you know, farmers and ranchers are the same way. They don't throw nothing away because you might be able to use it sometime later, right? You might be able to repurpose it. So we kind of grew up being like that. I was taught how to live off the land, more than living off the land, but to live with the land. So how we harvest actually stimulates growth. We don't take everything, it actually stimulates growth. But that road that my dad prepared me for, it no longer exists. If we were all to go back to a subsistence lifestyle, Mochimaka, Grandmother Earth, wouldn't be able to sustain us anymore. We have to have this conversation because if they don't have a future, we don't have a future as well. Because they're an ancient, ancient being that's been here for thousands upon thousands of years, just like us. We have an old story, and I'll use this story as an example on how our lifeways still continue. I used to always be scared to tell people our oral histories and our sacred knowledge because I think they're going to think I'm crazy. If I tell them those things, I'm going to end up in a state hospital in Jamestown running around in pajamas because they can't believe what I tell them. But there's an old story long ago, and all of our gifts that came to us, even in the past, there was climate change. Because every time the climate changed, it created a need, and then creation responded to that need, and gifts were brought to our people. And in this particular story, they said there was sickness and there was famine, and the people were really having a hard time. There's a place in the Black Hills that they call Buffalo Gap, and this story happened there, where a warrior went out looking for food for his people, but everywhere he looked, he couldn't find anything. And the people were starving. And he come upon this herd right there at Buffalo Gap. And as he stood there, he sent his voice out to creation on behalf of his people, for the love that he had of his people. And he said out of that herd, a bull came. And a bull walked towards them, and there was a little mound of dirt. And that bull went and stood on that mound, and it spoke to him. And it said, "Grandson, what is it that you're asking for?" And that warrior said, I'm asking for help for my people. I'm praying that you'll help my people. So that bull told him, he said, grandson, come back tomorrow, and there'll be one that will sacrifice itself to you, so that your people may live. So as he was instructed, he went back the next day, and sure enough, a bull came out of the herd and then turned itself broadside to him. And with one shot, he took that bull. He was so overjoyed with being able to provide for his people again, and the people nursed themselves back to health off of the blood and the meat from that bull, that he was so thankful he wanted to go back and thank them again. He went back to that place the following year, and this time a cow came up, and she stood on that little hilltop, and she asked him, grandson, what is it that you need? And he said, I'm so thankful for that one that sacrificed itself. I'm so thankful for that bull that told me to come back. I wanted to tell him thank you. And she said, grandson, that's the one that sacrificed himself for you. So today, those of us that know these stories and those of us that were raised in this way, we still hunt like that. Early in the morning before the sun gets up, we get up and we prepare ourselves, not only mentally but spiritually. And prayers are said for all the hunters that are out there. But we won't drink any water and we won't eat. We fast as we hunt. Because the old teachings is that when you're tired and you're hungry and you're in a pitiful state and you're cold, the animal nations will present themselves and sacrifice so that you and your family will live. When I was at that age where I was out hunting by myself, one day I went and I got a deer. I took it back to my Uncle Philip and I showed him. I said, look, Uncle, this one presented us. Boy, he was happy. He just beamed at me. You know how we look at our grandchildren, how we look at our nephews. He just beamed at me. And he was excited. He said, throw it in the trunk, he said. So I didn't know what was going on. I threw it in the trunk. We went into town in a community on Standing Rock called Wakwala. And he told me, he said, pull in here. And we pulled in there. He taught me how to skin it and then taught me how to quarter it. He grabbed a quarter and he went in that house and he gave it away. And I was young, and immature, and I was thinking, man, I walked all day to get that deer. And here you are, you're giving it away. And then he'd come back and he smiled at me and went to the next house. He took another quarter in there, went to the next house. And we did that until the entire deer was gone. And to be honest with you, I think I was kind of pouting, because I walked a long ways to get that deer, and I drug it just as far. But when we went back out in the country to the house, he beamed at me again. He said, now you're always going to be a good provider, not only to your family, but to your people. So you see how that life way, how that understanding came from then, but they way out there. Because in our belief systems, these languages that are spoken on this continent are sacred languages. And they're real difficult to translate into English. I'm going to ask you to do something real silly. I want you to tap your head and make a circle on your belly. Now I want you to switch it. That feel a little awkward? I want you to clasp your hands. Now I want you to change your grip. Does that feel a little awkward? That's what it's like to think in Lakota and then try to translate that thought into English. Or to be thinking in English and try to translate that thought into Lakota. It's a little challenging. And some of our words don't translate very well into this language. But I'm here to tell you that I'm very fortunate. I look at myself as being a very fortunate person because of the gift of my language that was given to me, because of the gift of the oral histories that were given to me. And I want to share something else with you before I end, is that if all you do is ask a man's opinion, all you're going to get is a male perspective. There's a female side of things as well. But in our ways, because the females are so sacred, we can't talk about them. Men shouldn't talk about the female side of things. But I want to introduce you to my wife. Sitting over here is my beautiful wife, Martina Miller Eagle. And her Lakota name is Nape Wakanwi. It means her hands are sacred. And she was told, and it was prophesied when she was a little girl, that she was going to be a mother to many. You know, other men's wives bring home stray cats and stray kittens. My wife brings home stray kids. So our house is always busy, and it was a great experience, and continues to be a great experience. But I just want to put that thought in your mind that if all you do is ask a man's opinion, all you're going to get is a male perspective, and you're missing out on the female side of things. When our family butchers, it's not us men. It's not us men that do the butchering, it's the women. And when you think about the structure of that patelia, its back and its rib cage, that backbone supports that entire structure. The entire structure of that buffalo, that backbone supports. And that's what our women are to us. We refer to them as the backbone of our nation because they hold that entire structure of our nation together. Women are sacred. Women are connected to everything in the universe, all these cycles that I told you about. Because in our creation story, that first act of creation was a female one, because man can't bring life into this world. And because man can't bring life into this world, we have to suffer and sacrifice in order for our prayers to be as strong as theirs. I don't know if I should tell you this or not, but it was 1978. President Jimmy Carter, who passed the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act. Think about that. 1978, I think all of us in the room were alive at that time. It's when the federal government said, you can practice your way of life. 2 years before that, my wife struck tree at a Sundance. And when she told us that story, she said, my granny made me an outlaw. Because they were living our way of life. We didn't need a foreign people to tell us it was okay to live that. But the thing I want to end with, we got to correct history now. Because the narrative that was created in history isn't correct. Because you see, as the immigrants came into our country, there wasn't warfare. They don't tell you that. They wa'unshila them. They had compassion for them because they were ill-equipped to be here. They didn't know how to gather food here. They didn't know what the medicines were. They didn't know how to build structures to keep them warm in the winter, to keep them cool in the summer. So our people actually helped them. My dad used to be able to speak German. Why do you think he could speak German? Because along this beautiful river of ours, before the flooding of the dams, there was a symbiotic relationship between my people and the immigrants who came. And I've run into older German people that could say Lakota words too, because there was this beautiful lifeway down on that river bottom, where certain times a year our peoples gathered together. We gathered together and we shared harvests with each other. We shared teachings, we shared understandings. We were so interconnected and interdependent upon one another. Because you Germans really make good sausages. we really like your sausages. Even today we still do. But the flooding of that river created a disconnect. You see, when I talked to when I used to listen to my mother-in-law talk to my wife, she used to tell stories about going to something called a barn dance and square dances and, Wishick, Linton. And my dad grew up breaking horses for ranchers and farmers down on, we're from the South Dakota side of Standing Rock. There was a symbiotic relationship amongst our people. There was never any money passed. They shared goods with each other. They shared services with each other. But that federal action that flooded this river created a disconnect between us now. We have to fix that. We have to correct that. Because if we're ever going to have true unity in this state or in this country, we have to learn to acknowledge and appreciate our diversity. I've been to 5 countries because of my military service. I've been to 48 of our states. And I've seen such beauty in this world that only a poet could add word to that experience. And everywhere I've gone, I've seen the beauty of creation. That's why I say, in our way, we're supposed to be thankful each and every morning we wake up, because this is the gift. Being here in this beautiful place with each other. And that's why at the ending of our prayers we say, Matakoyase.
Mr. Eagle, I asked this in a good way. I'm Les Thomas from the Turtle Mountain Band in Chippewa. And recently we had a white buffalo calf born to our tribe in our herd. And I understand it's a Lakota legend with white buffalo calf woman. Relate to us about the significance of the white buffalo.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm not going to tell the story of Patesawe, White Buffalo Calf Woman, because it's a sacred story. But she's that spiritual being that brought our bundle to us. So when you think about all the cultures around this planet, everybody was given something. Every culture was given something by creation, by their creator, by God, however you refer to that higher. Everybody was given something. But we still have ours. My uncle, Lakshmi Orville Looking Horse, is the 19th generation keeper of that bundle, and we still have it. But there was prophecies that came with that bundle. And one of them was that one day the animal nations were going to show their sacred colors. And when they do, you're going to be at a crossroads. But we didn't know what that meant until, I believe it is in the 90s, that white buffalo calf was born in Jamestown, North Dakota. You remember that? It heralded the time of that prophecy, that the animal nations were going to show their sacred color, and that sacred color they showed was white. Ever since then, there's been spottings of white moose, white elk, white deer. Even a white eagle was spotted one time. And it's the animal nations showing us that we're at that crossroads now. That crossroads is climate change. And I know that a lot of people have a hard time with that. But you know, I like going to horse sales. We're ranchers, we raise horses. I like walking around in the back. Because all those old cowboys, they're real generous with what they know, you know. So they're always walking up to me, and we strike up conversations, and they share things with me. And a few years ago, when the weather patterns really changed and the winter got really kind of unpredictable, I asked this old cowboy back then, I don't remember where he was from, but I said, have you ever seen a winter like this before? And he said, no, but I've never seen one like last year either. The weather patterns are changing. And everything's getting a little unpredictable out there. But you know what? We can change this. We can affect it. And I think part of the answer lies in all of us going back and looking in our past. Because in our past, when I talk to farmers and ranchers in North Dakota, the old people, they had star knowledge. They knew when to plant without having to look at a calendar. They knew when to harvest without looking at a calendar. My generation woke up when the sun came up, and we went to bed when the sun went down. Our bodies are still in tune to all of that, the symbiotic relationship that we have with everything in creation, but the generation amongst us, the young people, are disconnected from it because they're staring at cell phones, or they're staring at tablets, or they don't even have interactions like this, they're on chats. And even that was a prophecy. We have I want to say a character, the trickster. And in one of the prophecies it said that Ikto was going to cast a web around the world. World Wide Web. And our kids are addicted to it. We have to get them back outside. We have to get them back outside. We have to start planting our gardens again. We have to start canning again and preparing for winters. You know, when that pandemic hit, because our family lives subsistence lifestyle, there was many people down in Standing Rock that were running out of food, but we had buffalo, elk, and deer in our freezers. We had squash, and we had medicines and stuff, because we still lived that subsistence lifestyle. But I thank you for that question, and I keep waiting. I always look at my wife because I have what would you say, a reputation of being long-winded. Can you imagine that, me? But usually if I go over, she'll flash this at me, and then she's telling me 2 minutes, time to end the call. But you know, I'm really fortunate to be here this morning. I'm really honored to have been asked, especially to talk about such a sacred relative. They say that in the springtime, when the rivers flowed, that the scouts would go out looking for them. And wherever that sign was, maybe they'd go north. This Missouri River is called Manishoshe. It means turbulent water. If the sign was in the north, and they'd head north along Manishoshe to that confluence over there by Williston. And whatever the signs were there, maybe they kept going into northern Montana following Manishoshe, or maybe they went in southern Montana along Kehakawakpa, Elk River. Or maybe they went along Palaniwakpa, the Grand River, or Wakpawashte, the Cheyenne River. Cheyenne River takes you out to Casper, Wyoming. The Lakota people during this time of year would have been in large camps. And the reason for that is they would have been in large herds at this time of year. Then in the fall, there was a sacred movement back to where they were going to winter. And the buffalo herds would split off and form smaller herds. And then the bulls would go off by themselves. So we were the same way. As my ancestors would make that trip back from the hunting grounds, they'd split up. And they'd go to where they were going to winter. And the Lakota people wintered along the rivers. There's a song, and that's what I'll end with, is as they were making their way back during fall, and they were following Pateoyate, they say that Buffalo Nation would string out in a big long line as they were coming. As my ancestors were following them and harvesting, they used to sing this song. Wazia dakia manepe, wazia dakia manepe, tatanka heyo hey reo hey ro. Wazia dakia manepe, wazia dakia manepe, tatanka heyo hey reo hey ro. That rhythm, that beat, is only sung for leaders. They used to refer to our leaders as old bulls. And in Lakota, they say bloka. Bloka was that herd bull. Our greatest leader, that man that's on this hat, Tatanka Ayutanke, Sitting Bull. When his warriors were asked about him, how he learned to become who he was, they said he didn't try to be like any other man. He tried to be like the buffalo. So with that, I thank you for listening to me this morning. I'm very happy and thankful to have been here with all of you. Matakoyase.